Good morning, everybody. It's Jeff Goldberg for the Sales Pro Network. If you haven't joined us before, I am a sales coach and trainer, and I work with both individuals and organizations to help them get measurable and sustainable sales increases. And I founded the Sales Pro Network to elevate the profession of sales. If you've been with us before, you know that every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, I either do a live training or most weeks, I bring you a guest who can add value to the profession of sales. And I promise you, my friends, I have not let you down once again. This is going to be a great one. In fact, I was just having such a great conversation with them that I looked up at the clock and said, oh my God, we go on in 8 seconds. Let's get going. So today's guest helps salespeople and business leaders break through the noise by embracing authenticity, leading, selling, and communicating with integrity. He's a former executive vice president, and he's raised billions, that's billions with a B, billions of dollars, while guiding Fortune 500 companies through transformative growth. Please welcome our guest today, Scott Ramey. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Jeff. Thank you for having me. This is so exciting to be here with you.
I'm very excited to talk to you too. Before I get to the 1,000,001 questions I have for you, could you maybe give us the 2 or 3 minute of your background, version of your background to bring us up to speed?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I hear it, and thank you for the gracious introduction. When I hear that, I still don't believe it, frankly, because I grew up in a very small town in Indiana called Crawfordsville, Indiana. Humble background. I was one of 4 boys. Our mother taught us kind of this fierce competitiveness, so maybe that's what's led me to be relatively successful in my career. And I had a lot of roles in the sales process. So I started out as knocking on doors. Well, actually, before that, before I graduated from college, I was an intern for a new financial advisor who was a CFO, and he wants to start his own business. And he's like, hey, if you can help drive a bunch of people to my seminars, I'll pay you $5,000 by the end of the summer. And that's the most money I'd ever seen, heard of, or even possibly could have in my hands. So that went really, really well. And that kind of catapulted me into financial services industry. So I spent my entire 30+ year career in financial services. Started as a financial advisor, knocking on doors, door to door, Edward Jones and Company, internal wholesaler, external wholesaler, business development leader and head of all product lines at Transamerica. And then I found my way into an operational role for 3 years, which was really, really great as a salesperson. Be happy to chat about those experiences. And then ultimately fell back into and settled back into business development, sales, relationship management roles. So I'm really, really grateful for all the experiences I've had. And frankly, for a kid who doesn't have an advanced degree, who was a history major, I shared that with you in the green room, and grew up in such a small town. I'm so grateful for being in the position I've been in.
Yes. And, it's funny you say advanced degrees. I don't think you need an advanced degree to be in sales, that's for sure. I'm a college dropout, and as we say in the Jewish religion, I do okay. But I think the reason for that, I'm often asked, and I'd love your opinion on this, Jeff. You've got a bunch of the traits that you were born to be successful in sales, yeah. And it's true. I do have some of the traits that tend to make you better in sales, but just because you don't have them doesn't mean that you're not going to be successful. Like, I am friendly, and I'm outgoing, and I'm funny, and I'm honest, and things like that. But what's your feeling about, are salespeople made, or are they born, or is it a combination of both?
I think it's probably a combination of both, and it's certainly a skill that can be taught. I think the hard skills can be taught. The soft skills are the ones that maybe if I look at maybe my superpower, it really was rooted in Indiana. And the reason why I bring up Indiana is because everything I learned, honestly, I learned from my grandmother. We called her Woohoo. Because she'd walk into a house, and if she didn't immediately see somebody, she'd say woohoo, and then people would appear. But I just watched how she just authentically maneuvered relationships, and that's just something that I would watch her, no matter who we would bring to the house, complete strangers, the warm embrace, the hug, the kiss on the cheek, her urgency to get some food in that individual's belly. And it's just like, wow. And she worked 37 years, same company, same chair, same role for 37 years, unbelievably loyal, dedicated. And she just knew how to show up, and she had such resilience. She lost her husband when I was a month old. And I never forget asking her, I said, hey, Grandma, why didn't you remarry? She goes, I married the person I loved. And so those characteristics, I just brought them with me into every role I ever had. And when I talk about authenticity and being authentic, that's really the root of what I discuss and what I try to teach people, because that skill, that quote unquote soft skill, which is really a hard skill, which is a necessary skill, I think is a differentiator from good to great.
We're getting power to grandma. All right. And I'm betting, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that when woohoo would walk in and people would come around. I'll bet it wasn't, let me tell you how fantastic I am and how my day is going. I'm betting it was all about what's new with you, Scotty Poo, or maybe, I don't know if she actually called you that.
Probably Scott Mo.
There you go, Scott Mo, woohoo and Scott Mo. I'm betting it was, tell me what your life is doing. Tell me your dream. Am I right?
Yeah, there was no, it was almost like, I kind of think of Tai Chi and martial arts where you're almost reacting simultaneously. She would get into just a flow with individuals where, look, at the heart of everything I talk about, Jeff, and everything I've talked about for years, we can get into why. When it's no longer about you, the pressure is no longer on you. So if the audience today takes away anything from sales to leadership to management, it doesn't matter. And I watched her. That was a fundamental principle of who she was. It was never, and I mean never, about her, ever. And my brothers and I, to this day, still talk about how a remarkable woman she was. And unfortunately, towards the later part of her life, she had dementia, and so she kind of obviously forgot who we were. But we just absolutely adored her because she was just so real, just real.
Yeah. I can't tell you, well, I'm sure I don't have to tell you how many times I'm working with salespeople, and the answer is obvious to me. What's my problem, Jeff? You're making it about you. Let me tell you why Jeff Goldberg and Associates is the greatest training and coaching firm in the world. Blah. And then you throw up all over people, and people don't care about you. They care about themselves. And when the seller makes it about them, then I love the Dale Carnegie quote. It's better to be interested than interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that made me more successful in sales, because I'm wired up curious. I like to find out stuff. I've said this before on this program. There's a TV show called How Things Are Made. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Oh, yeah, I love that show. Yeah.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. How do they make frozen waffles? How do they make crayons? How do they make a tennis racket? I mean, just brilliant. So I'm kind of wired up naturally curious, which to me is the essence of sales, is asking questions. And if you're curious about what people are and what makes them tick, and of course, what do they want to accomplish and what are they doing, I think that's what can make you successful in sales. I want to ask you about something else.
Jeff, if I could just add to that, please add to that point. If you make it an energetic exchange versus a mechanical exchange, there's a huge difference what happens. And neuroscience and quantum physics, now there's been a lot of research and studies done about the energy field that we create. And if we're open, so I like to say interested, presence, and you have a great intention. And the interest is, I'm really genuinely interested in this conversation. And that energy that I evoke is met from that individual who I'm across from, or even a group. You can do it in front of a group. And then the presence is just being in the moment. The greatest gift we can give our audience is to be fully present. And I would argue that to my death, literally, because especially in an era of distractions and what we're experiencing every single day, every interaction we have, almost, we're all distracted. We're all running 100 miles an hour. We have these devices that are, always with us. And then lastly, intention is like intentionally creating. I intended in this conversation with you to learn as much about you rather than you learn about me. That's how I'm wired. I too am an interested communicator. And if you're an interested communicator, you don't have to sell, because it gets such a bad connotation. And I'm sure you hear this all the time. Like, I'm not a salesperson. I don't want to sell. You are. All of us are salespeople.
Yeah, I say that all the time. I'm proud to be in sales, but I don't really sell anything. All I do is have conversations with people, and some of them choose to do business with me at the end because I am interested in them. And it's funny. I think I might have mentioned when we first did a pre-interview, I'm a stand-up comedian on the side. And, part of my act is I hate people, and I don't have patience for a lot of people. But when I do sit down with somebody who I'm trying to, form a sales relationship with, I am genuinely interested in them. And I am genuinely curious about what makes them tick and what's going on, because that's the only way I can find out if I can help them. I never, ever assume that I can help them until, it's easy to be cocky. Oh, I'm a great sales trainer. I can help anybody. I've had situations where I've walked in and said, you know what? You don't really need me. Let me introduce you to somebody else, because what you need is not what I do, but it's being interested in them. But I want to go somewhere else because you said something else. And by the way, we haven't even gotten to the 50 million questions I wrote for you so far.
Right.
But, you mentioned that your first job was knocking on doors. Mine too. I sold Encyclopedia Britannica door to door for 8 years. I had a kiosk at the LaGuardia Airport in the Delta terminal. I would exhibit at state fairs. What did door-to-door sales teach you? Because I can tell you, I had some incredibly interesting experiences of a wide variety of types. What did you learn from knocking on doors?
Yeah, before I answer that question, I want to just talk about why it was so difficult for me. we didn't discuss this yet, and it's if people go to my website, they'll see that I do talk about it, and I started openly talking about just about 2.5 years ago. It's kind of a recent phenomenon. I had my first panic attack when I was 19, and so I've been living with anxiety ever since. And so when of course, what's a logical business to go into if you're just scared to death of pretty much everything at that moment, at that time, so obviously I've matured and evolved, is sales. So it's just interesting. It probably wasn't the best choice for me right out of the gate to put myself in really uncomfortable positions all the time. However, that being said, what I learned is about gradient steps. Is knocking on doors. And at Edward Jones back in the day, it was an interesting experience. They really, really were good about teaching you the skill of selling. They would use the term pleasantly persistent, which I still use to this day.
Me too.
I love that idea.
I say politely persistent, but it's the same.
Yes. And because the way they taught us to sell was a series of events, not one event. I wasn't going knocking on a door with the anticipation or the hope or the dream to close that person. And what it did was it gave me freedom to just be myself. And so I learned a few things. One, it's really hard work to knock on doors. We were required to make 25 contacts, not door knocks a day. And second is I learned that by just being myself, I would have warm invites and warm embraces. I can't tell you the number of times I lost track, literally, no exaggeration. I lost track of the number of times I was invited into the kitchen table, and the person would go grab their statements wherever they were, bring them to me and say, what can you do? Can you help me with this? Mm. And I knew nothing at that point, like literally knew nothing. I was learning. They teach you to knock on doors before they teach you like the basics and fundamentals of asset management and financial planning. So I learned a few things. I learned I can do this job. I learned that I can connect with people. And it reminded me of really kind of who I was, which was a person that I think people generally like to spend some time with, which is, for your ego is really good when you're kind of in that imposter syndrome stage of your life.
Brilliant. Yeah, I had a different experience knocking on doors because Britannica is a one-call close, or it was a one-call close. We're talking 40, 50 years ago. And back then it was a $2,000 investment minimum. It went as high as $5,000, but the basic set was $2,000. And we knew for a fact that if people didn't buy them the first time we met them, they were never going to buy them. Because suddenly it was like, well, $2,000, I can send my kids to the library to do it for free. And, the kind of magic after you left wore off. In fact, at the time, there was a 72-hour rescission on the back of the contract, where they could cancel within 3 days, get their deposit back and all that stuff. And we were taught, pull it out and show it to them. Don't let them read it later. So now you have 72 hours to cancel this agreement. You'll get your deposit back, no problem at all. But if you're going to do that, just do it right now. In fact, why don't you tell me what made you decide to invest in Britannica tonight? We would get them to resell themselves before we left. I just have to say one other thing because it's so funny. When you said you would be invited to the dinner table. So I once went on a sales call. I walked in and the entire family was in the dining room at a big table with like 15 people. And my immediate thought is, oh, I'm going to get kicked out immediately. There's no way this guy's going to sit down with me and talk about Britannica. I said, oh, I see you've got dinner going on. He goes, no, come on in. Let's go sit at the kitchen table. We'll talk about it. And with Britannica, you never did a one-legged pitch, which means you would sit with the husband or the wife. Never, because it was a built-in excuse at the end. Oh, I didn't realize it was $2,000. I do have to talk to my wife. But guy sat down. 20 minutes later, he's writing a check for whatever it was with the tax, 21 and change. And I get up, I'm shaking his hand, congratulations, and I'm ready to walk out. He goes, where are you going? I said, we're done. Is there anything else you need? He goes, sit down. You're having dinner too. And he made his wife get up and feed me and sit at the. Now, how do I say this? I don't think you have to be politically correct. If this guy wasn't in the mafia, then I don't know what he did for a living, because he just gave off that vibe. And when he said, no, sit down, you're going to eat dinner, I'm like, okay, I think I'm eating dinner.
Yeah, I'll just sit down.
That was one of the milder experiences. But yeah.
It was fun though, wasn't it? I mean, I thought it was so much fun.
I love being in people. Oh, you see the craziest things. And some of the things that happen, I actually don't want to discuss on a live interview, but it was great experience. And fortunately, I was recruited away to become the national sales director at a company called Frost & Sullivan 2 years before the end came, because Britannica did not see the end coming. everybody was asking us, do you have these on CD-ROM? That's how long ago this was. There was no internet even. Do you have these on CD-ROM? And we were trained to say, would you want your kids reading Shakespeare on CD-ROM? Except they did want all that. At any rate, I got very fortunate. So let's get back to you. One of the things you teach is called the S.P.E.A.K, S-P-E.A.K framework. What is the S.P.E.A.K framework?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So it was born out of necessity because of my anxiety. And what I realized is that there were a couple things that were in play. If those of anybody in the audience who's ever had a panic attack realizes that the worst thing about having a panic attack is the anticipation of the next one. I call it my shadow, always there, mocking, always lurking, waiting to appear just in the right circumstances. So what I realized pretty early in my career is like, I need to make sure that I'm overly prepared. And so I call it speak now. I didn't call it then. I just did it then. But speak, the 5 parts clearly. S is for style. What I encourage everyone to do is really define what you want your style to be. So long after you're gone, how are you going to be remembered? And for me, as I evolved, my style evolved clearly, but I always wanted to be lofty, playful, and wise. Long after I'm gone, if they think about the interaction they had with me, whether it was in a group sales conversation or individual one-on-one conversation as a leader, that's what I wanted people to remember. So we go through exercises to help the individual or teams, if I'm coaching a team, define the style, because teams have style too, a very unique style about them. The P is for presence. I talked a little bit about that earlier, about being in the moment. And a lot of that is driven really, frankly, from eye contact. Is that I find that if you can teach people how to be really connected, not staring, but really engaged through eye contact, the likelihood that the connection is amplified is pretty high. E is for empathy. I teach a very, very detailed pre-call assessment, pre-call analysis, or pre-presentation analysis, going through all the potential objections, concerns, issues, anticipate everything. So then it can help inform your rebuttal file too. But maybe the difference than just having a rebuttal file is how to build that content then into the presentation. Because I'm a huge believer, you don't need more time to make a point, you need fewer words. And the big obstacle and challenge that I see mostly is we have all this information in our head we want to share, and we try to share it all. And there's only a few parts probably, or a few pieces that are really relevant to the client. And A is for authenticity, which frankly is my favorite. You see it all over my content and my material. Authenticity to me is a driver. I've developed what I call the authentic connection continuum, where it's about affinity, genuinely connecting with people, naturally connecting, communication, clarity, keep it simple and clear, shared experiences, the wins and losses that we can demonstrate together. What is it going to be? What it's going to feel like to work with us, to do business with us? Creating this, evoking these emotions that are important to understand what the relationship will be. And then maybe the most important, Jeff, is vulnerability. This is an underutilized skill. And let me tell you why I think it's underutilized. To me, it's the gasoline, it's the catalyst. If you want to spark a relationship with somebody, demonstrate a level of vulnerability with them. And I reached out to Dr. Sue Carter. She's an expert and has been studying oxytocin, the bonding hormone, for years. She's at Indiana University. I sent her an email. Frankly, I didn't expect her to respond, but she did. And I said, here's my hypothesis. If I'm presenting, just as an example, or even if I'm in a group pitch, like I came from a world where you would pitch to committees. I tell a story that demonstrates vulnerability. Do I release oxytocin? And her response was, yes, you do. In turn, because I told that story, I demonstrated vulnerability. Does my audience also release oxytocin? And she says, you are absolutely on the right path. So you amplify connection. Complete strangers. Now, we can get into the whole implications for people you actually know and demonstrate vulnerability, but just for the context of speak. And then the K in speak is knowledge. How do I take all of this information I have and narrow it down? And within that framework, within the knowledge and framework, it's where I created the power of 3, which is just a very simple way to people to help organize their thoughts.
You beat me to it because I want to ask about that. What is the power of 3?
Yeah. So like I said, it's just the simplest way possible to help people organize their thoughts in a way that's methodical. One of the biggest mistakes I see in presenters or salespeople is we want to memorize our script. We spend all this time committing everything to memory. Well, based upon what I just shared, presence is impossible to be present with somebody if you're in your mind thinking about what you want to say next. And so when I see people who are presenting, I observe that they get lost. They get lost in what they want to say, but more importantly, they're not connecting with the audience. You start to see the audience glaze over. So the power of three, there are 3 goals, 3 steps, and 3 parts. And later I'll share up my website. You can literally go to my website, download this for free. I just want to provide value to folks. The 3 goals are, what's my main purpose? Why am I there? And I know that may be obvious to some, but I don't know that it is, because the first question we typically ask is, how much time do I have? So why are we there? What is it? To educate, inform, to sell, to position, whatever it is, really clearly define that main purpose. The second is the key message. I think of this like, if there's one thing I want that person or that group to remember long after I'm gone, that's your key message. And it should be a thread that's pulled through your entire presentation, your entire conversation. In fact, it's even brought back at the end of the presentation, just before the close or the next step. And then lastly, of the 3 goals is your desired audience action. Oftentimes, more times than not, sadly, we get in front of a group to present, or we're selling, and we never have an action step. It could be simply just advance to the next conversation. It could be more of a traditional close, whatever it might be. But what is your desired audience out? So once you have that, then you can start to build the presentation. So in the 3 steps, brainstorming. So I mentioned audience analysis. This is where you take all of this information that you've acquired, all the knowledge that you know, either known or unknown or assumed, and you start to anticipate what are the issues that you're going to come up against in the course of your conversation or presentation. Write it all down, 15 minutes, 20 minutes max. And then you start to organize it. I recommend 3 parts, power of 3. Why? More memorable. Because really the challenge that we have is around memorability. Long after we're gone, are they going to remember what we said? Most of the time, they're not going to remember a lot of what we said. But the hope is with our key message that we can bring it back and we can just really hammer that point home. And then lastly is this refinement. The third step is to refine continuously. Now, the most important part of all of this is, how do I organize it? So once you've brainstormed, you start to refine your brainstorming, you organize your 3 topics that you want to discuss. Then you think about your opening hook. What am I going to say to grab their attention? If it's a sales call, you may have 7 seconds. If it's a presentation, you may have 30. But how am I going to leave the audience wanting to hear more? It could be a story. What I used to do almost 100% of the time, when I was, no matter if I was at a meeting, an internal meeting, external meeting, I would tell a personal story that demonstrated, you guessed it, vulnerability. Because I wanted them to understand who I was at the core. I wanted to start to create that connection at the beginning. You don't have to. There's 100 different ways, 1,000 different ways to start the presentation. And then the core content. What I recommend, 3 topics, bullet points. Use bullet points, not long sentences, nothing that's going to require you to memorize anything. The bullet points are there for you to go back as a point of reference, grab the bullet point, re-engage the audience, and you're off and running. And then lastly, the memorable conclusion. It's where I recap what I've said. I give them the key message that I want them to take away. If you only remember one thing from anything I say today, this is what I want you to remember. And then I go to my conclusion or my close, whatever that might be. So there's a lot there. Like I said, we can give the website information out later. Download it. It gives you instructions. You can use it. I can assure you it's going to change the way you think about building presentations.
We're definitely going to give your website out at the end, but why don't you give it now, just in case somebody doesn't stick around?
Sure. It's thescottramey.com or thescottramey.com, Queen's English.
Got it. I noticed in one of your posts recently, you were talking about the power of 3, and you actually gave some examples of rather famous speakers who were using that as a technique. I hope you know what I'm referring to. Yeah. Can you give a couple of examples?
Well, I mean, look, this is not a new concept. It goes back to the ancient Greek days. Socrates, Plato, many people have used this to frame up. Even if you watch a movie, for example, every movie typically starts with the end and then then starts with the end in mind and then starts to build a presentation and comes back to the end. The concept is so easy in terms of tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. Enhances memorability. So this is as old as time. I mean, if you go on chat or Google and pull up anyone, I mean, there's been ancient Greek philosophers using this process for years. Playwrights, it's been used ad nauseum, which begs the question is, why is it not more prevalent in how we build presentations? And I think I know the answer is because I've witnessed over and over and over again that oftentimes, at least when I would take over a sales organization, and most of the time they were underperforming, I say, okay, how do we go about building our presentation? And then all of a sudden a PowerPoint deck flashes up. And then we start to edit the PowerPoint deck. Like, no, wrong way to do this. We need to really focus on what we want to say. And then we build the PowerPoint deck.
You actually, you had given some examples. I think Martin Luther King was one and Steve Jobs was another. And I'm reading them going, yeah, he's absolutely right. 3 things every time. It's a thing in sales. It's also a thing in comedy. 3 things just tends to work better and sticks in people's minds. By the way, you said something else about the most important thing. I always tell salespeople, when I go into corporations, I do full days of training. I save this towards the end, and I actually tell them what I'm about to tell you is the most important thing I can possibly tell you in sales. If you take away nothing else from the 7.5 hours we invest together today, this is the one thing I want you to know. And you actually mentioned the thing. I call it Be Nasty, BNASTY, which stands for a best next action step towards yes. You want to constantly be moving the sale forward. So many times I see salespeople end a sales call with, "Hey, Scott, this has been great today. I'm going to go back and I'll write up a proposal. I'll get that ready for you. I'll give you a call. We can set up another meeting. I'll come back and share it with you. And that way you can make a decision."
Yeah.
Now you go back, you write up your proposal, and you try to get in touch with somebody. It ain't easy. They're not sitting at their desk waiting for your call or your email or however you're going to reach out. But if you just set that next meeting while you're talking to somebody, whether it's over Zoom, on the phone, or in person, you find out if somebody's actually interested, because nobody gives you some of their valuable time and then agrees to give you more unless they're interested. And you shorten your sales cycle. Instead of chasing people for days or weeks to get that next appointment, you've got it set right there.
Yeah. I actually learned that concept from Frank Luntz, Words That Work, and now Polster. But he would teach that, and then he would obviously with the dial, he not just for polling for for political campaigns, but he did it with stories. And you would come in as a professional, you come in, you'd have individuals sitting there with the polling dial up and down, and you'd give your pitch for your presentation, and you would be rated. And it was a humbling experience. But Frank was very, very significant advocate for give them the one thing, if anything, the one thing they're going to remember. You need to give that to them.
Yep. Yeah. Getting feedback, watching your, role playing. I don't do this anymore, but I used to go into corporations and I would videotape a sales call. I'd train somebody how to be the customer. Somebody would come in and give their presentation. I'm not saying a word doing the whole thing. I'm just taking notes. And when we would finish, I would then play back the video that they just made and say, why don't you pick out, you tell me when to stop and start the video. You tell me what you think you did well. You tell me what you think you could have done better. And it's just stunning how people would watch themselves and go, I said that. I did that. Gee, I didn't really realize I picked my nose while I'm talking to prospect. Yeah, I did notice that. Maybe you should stop that. So it is a humbling experience, but really one of the best ways to learn.
Yeah.
One of the things you do is help present people more effectively. And many people consider speaking in public to be their biggest fear. I've said this before on this broadcast too, that, Jerry Seinfeld used to have a joke about, public speaking is most people's number one fear, followed by death and snakes. So people would rather get bit by a snake and die than speak in public. But you have some tips for reducing anxiety for those of us who are afraid to speak in public. Yeah. Okay, I won't say us. I'm not afraid. I'm actually one of those people who's wired up really strange. I love speaking in public. But for those who don't have that, what are some of the ways we can get past that anxiety?
Well, so we talked a little bit about a few of the concepts, but what we know for a fact is that well over 70% of Americans would rather do just about anything other than speak in public, which you stated beautifully. I'm going to take this from a position of what do I see the biggest challenges, because it's really what prevents people from being comfortable. And maybe the simplest way to think about this is we need to know what to say and who to be. And so knowing what to say, the biggest mistake, I referenced it earlier, that I've noticed is people try to memorize the content. And under high pressure situations, typically what I've seen and experienced as I teach this and have taught it for years, we get rattled because we lose a point. We lose our train of thought and we get completely rattled, which then in turn reduces our confidence and makes us less likely to want to do it again. The old adage, a cat that steps on a hot stove won't step on a cold one either. We as human beings learn lessons way too well. And typically what I have found is that the experience around discomfort or being uncomfortable around presenting has originated somewhere earlier in their experiences. I worked with a client recently who literally dropped his microphone giving a presentation when he was 12 years old at a church youth group. And he now has become deathly afraid of presenting. So I think one tip is to examine why. Now, what's the concern or fear around it? If it's about what to say, then obviously something like the power of three or many other tools and techniques out there to use to help organize your thoughts, and don't memorize them. Bullet point driven is the best. Now, who to be? I think there's this sense for a lot of people who are reluctant presenters that they have to perform. And what I would say is you need to be authentically yourself, that there's no right or wrong way to go about presenting. There just isn't. There are some spectacular presenters, and you look at them, you're like, wow, that's the city on the hill. I can never aspire to be that person. But most people are decent presenters. And I think you have to really be reflective about where you are on that continuum and lean into that strength and skill. So if humor is your strength, amplify the humor. If you're technical, amplify the technical aspect of things. But I think what I've seen over and over again is that we try to be someone we're not, and we try to perform. And that goes back to what I discussed earlier, is just be present, just be in the moment and be uniquely yourself. So organize your thoughts clearly, have a roadmap to follow so you can stay on point, and then really decide who you want to be, and don't try to be somebody else. And I would tell you probably early in my career, and part of the reason why I suffered from what I experienced is because I thought there was this perception of what I should be and not just being myself. So unmask your authentic self and be that person, and you'll be wonderful. I can assure you that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with what I call your come from, and I'm pointing to my gut right now. If you're coming from, oh, I hope I do well, or I hope whatever, you're going to act one way. Mine is always, how can I deliver the best possible value and experience to the people that are going to be listening to me? Yeah. It's the same thing on the comedy stage, or if I'm in front of an organization. How can I give my best and deliver what people really need? Because when you do that, I think your come from says, I'm just here to help you. I'm not here to sell you something. Look, of course, I'm here to sell an idea or sometimes my services, but at the end of the day, my thing is always, I'm here to serve. I think that's what sales is all about anyways. I love what Zig Ziglar used to say, that, stop selling and start helping. Yeah. The job is to help people. I have to ask you about something else.
Well, Jeff, if I could even add to that a little bit, to be vulnerable for a moment. When I started my business, I had this grand idea. I'm like, I'm going to post on LinkedIn, let everybody know what I'm up to. Had been in corporate America for 3 decades. I'm going to go out, start my own business to help sales and business leaders. I literally sat on the video I recorded for 8 days because my mind was thinking, and this is rooted in kind of who I thought I was throughout my corporate career, and this was validated when I was hired for a role at one point with a Fortune 100 company. Had to go through a psychological profile, and the assessment was positive. But one thing he shared with me, the doctor shared with me, is like, you're not a self-promoter. No, I'm not a self-promoter. I've never thought that was the game. I thought the game was performance and connecting with your team, advancing a cause, the greatest good for all concerned. But I brought that consideration with me into my new enterprise, where self-promotion is important. It's critical, in fact. But as you said, not because you're promoting something, it's because you have something to share of value and you can help people. And when I reframe that, to your point, when I reframed that I'm actually going to be helping people, I hit send. And now I have a placard on my door that says, just hit send, because that's really what it's about. I said earlier, if it's no longer about you, the pressure is no longer on you. And if you really truly believe you're providing value and you're not creating false urgency and trying to pitch and sell, you will be in a much better position.
Scott, what did the placard say? I missed that.
Oh, I just hit send.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I will often, I am a self-promoter because nobody's going to do it for me. So, I've made many, many videos where I go, I should redo it. You know what? Nobody cares. Just put it out there. It's if your come from, again, is the right thing. Of course, I'm promoting myself, but the way I personally do that is I post content every day. 5 days a week, I'm posting what I consider valuable content to the people that might have an interest in doing business with me? How do I give them advice that they would pay me for naturally? Actually, that's really what I'm doing. I'm giving away what I charge for. I understand that in one post or 2 or 5 posts, nobody's going to get what they'll get in a day or hiring me as a coach. But when you give it away generously, I find that that's what's attractive to people.
Absolutely. And if that one person, you impact one life, it's worth it. And it's the same thing in the sales cycle. Like when I was knocking on all those doors with Edward Jones, all I would think over and over again is I just need to find one person today that really can value what I can bring to the table. If I can find just one person, it's a win.
Yep, absolutely. Now, there's something else I saw on your website that I have to ask you about. What is the anti-bro sales approach? I don't know what that means, but I love the sound of it.
Yeah, so I joke. I'm not a guy that gets up and does 6 shots of espresso, drives to the gym in a Ferrari, and lifts really heavy weight. I love to work out. I like to be active, but I do think that there's this what I've seen over a lot, frankly, is this idea of we're creating false urgency. And that there's a desire to sell and hard close. And we've talked a little bit about that. That's just not my nature. I would think of it in terms of authentic selling is personal connection, bringing relevant value, and respectful ask. That no one really wants to be sold. At least I've never met anyone who wants to be sold. But if I can bring a personal connection to the conversation, bring relevant value because I've asked and connected in a way that I understand what this person needs or wants. And then the respectful ask is this kind of a dance that takes us to an agreement rather than coming over the top, hard, trying to really force the issue. And I had a great example just recently. This delightful young man knocks on my door here at the house, and he happened to be selling window washing services. And we literally just had the house pressure washed like 2 days before. And he went hard for the close. And I said, listen, I appreciate your enthusiasm and your excitement. But if you notice, the house was literally just cleaned. And he kept going. And all I could think after we finished, and I said, look, we just kind of separated, or he parted ways. All I could think of is if he would have taken a slightly different approach, which was, hey, I noticed your house was just pressure washed. You probably don't need my service today. But here's what I do. I would have taken his card and I would have probably called him. Because he was a lovely young man, very delightful. And big time personality, somebody that you could envision doing business with, but he came in with the bro sales, and I'm like, this is not going to work. It just doesn't work.
I get it now. Yeah, us old timers. Well, I'm older than you, but it was always don't take no for an answer. I do take no for an answer. And to me, first of all, no doesn't mean no forever. It means no today, but that we might do business. And I've certainly had people who I've met 5 years later, they become a client. But no is my second favorite word in sales. I like yes, don't get me wrong. But if no is at the top of my head, 1 millimeter below that is, if yes is at the top of my head, 1 millimeter below that is no. No frees you up. I love no. What I don't love is anything other than yes or no. Right. I need to think about it. I need to talk to my partner, all that other stuff, all that, all the stuff that really means get away from me and don't ever call me again. Yeah. But I want to say that, the people who are trying to use pressure, and I know how to pressure. I knew how to get a 1 call closed for a $2,000 set of books. I don't pressure anybody. First of all, I'm not interested in that. I don't need the aggravation that comes with trying to pressure somebody. And I don't think I'm good enough or talented enough to talk anybody into anything that they don't want, don't need, or can't afford. And even if I could, I don't want to be that person. But the thing that allows me to not have that pressure, to put pressure on others to buy, is consistent prospecting. When you're consistently prospecting, you have a full pipeline. You don't have to pressure anybody into anything. Now, I don't want anybody listening to this to get me wrong. I want to close every sale where I'm right for them and they're right for me. But the truth is, I don't care. If you say yes, terrific. If you don't say yes, terrific. Because I got 15 more people who are talking to me right now. And some of them are going to say yes. So when you are actively prospecting on a consistent basis, the pressure's off. Yes, I still want to close everything I possibly can, again, where I'm right for them and they're right for me. But it really, I don't walk away feeling bad anymore, which I did in the beginning. I'm like, I can't believe I didn't close that one. I should have gotten that one. There's just no pressure on me anymore. Yeah. When the biggest mistake I see in sales, and I'm guessing that, like me, you get a lot of questions from the people we sell to. I'm typically talking to a president or a CEO or a VP of sales, and they ask me lots of questions, and it's all regarding how do we increase sales. Now, why would they ask me? I don't work for them. I'm not going to blow smoke up their rear, and I'm going to give them the straight dope. 50% of the time, my answer is tell your lazy ass salespeople to meet with more decision makers. I don't care how good you are. I've been doing this 50 years. I'm pretty damn good at it. I can't close enough business unless I'm speaking to enough prospects.
Yeah.
Just can't.
Yeah.
So
and the right prospects too. Yeah. The right prospects. Yeah, I agree. And have the mindset that you've evolved to is such a wonderful place to be. Every organization that I ever took over that was underperforming, I saw the same two things. This is almost universal, actually three things, but the two are sales relative. Well, the third could be considered. First is they were selling on a scarcity versus abundance. They were chasing deals that had no relevance, no business at all being in their pipeline. It was because they were so desperate to close business and they were manufacturing a really full pipeline with hopes that it would eventually narrow into business. So that's number one. The second was lack of alignment across the organization, especially with messaging. That's why again, Power of Three was so good for my career, is because we could help get everybody aligned as what is our go-to-market message. When we have that opportunity to tell our story, how are we telling it? Because then it would amplify our brand. So if you didn't have big, millions and millions of dollars, which most of the organizations I worked for didn't have millions and millions of dollars to put into brand identity, then you could start to amplify brand one conversation at a time. It starts to build momentum. And then the third is probably no surprise to you at all, is that it was around recruitment and retainment of talent. Now, I would argue that the message then there is just as important as it is in the sales messaging, because casting a vision and generating excitement on the recruiting front is so important. So if you're not telling a really clear, engaging, exciting story to your potential recruits, you're going to miss the boat there as well. But those are by far, I've been surveying salespeople for a long time. I'm sure you have as well, or sales leaders. Those are the things that I see over and over again. And I saw them in my organizations, but I wanted to survey people because I didn't want to jump to conclusions that just because I saw it in the companies I worked at, they're universal.
Yeah, that scarcity selling tactic blows my mind every time. And I love hearing it because I rebel against it. I'm not going to name the company, but one of the things I do is outsourced or fractional sales management. So when I take over a sales team, often I'm bringing in different vendors because we need this, we need this CRM, we need this database, whatever it is. And I was talking to a very famous company that sells information about prospects, their cell phone and email address and all that stuff. And the very first time I'm talking to one of these guys, it's like, okay, Jeff, so here's the pricing, but if you do it in the next 3 days, I can get you this. And my answer was, I wish you hadn't said that, because now I'm absolutely not going to make a decision within the next 3 days. I'm absolutely going to wait till next week. And I know that when I call you next Friday and say, hey, remember that deal you were going to give me last week? I need it now. You're going to say, let me go to my manager, and then you're going to give it to me. So don't do that ever again. And by the way, every time I brought that, by the way, they're great at what they do. Yeah. They're famous, and they really are a great product. Not cheap, but they are a great product. But every time I bring them in, another guy does the same exact thing to me. And it's like, please, now you're making me wait. You could have closed the deal today, but now I have to wait till next week because of that scarcity thing. The only time I personally use scarcity is when it's true. So, yes. Guys like you and me who speak or train, there's a limited inventory. Yes. So if I really don't have availability, then I'll say, what I will say to people is, look, here's what I'll do. If you're even considering, let me block out this date for you. I'm just going to put a hold on it. You are not obligated in any way. All this means is if somebody else reaches out to me and wants that date, I will let you know first so you can make a decision. Fair enough. And then I do not call them and say, hey, somebody else wants it, unless that's really true. Yeah. I don't need tricks. Well, I don't have to trick anybody into buying. If you've got to trick people into buying, either you suck at selling or you should go sell something else.
Yeah, and that's selling out integrity. That's what I would call that.
I wanted to ask you about that too, because you talk about selling with integrity, and you also talk about selling authentically. Are the two things the same, or is there a difference between selling authentically and selling with integrity?
Similar. Selling out integrity is what you just defined, is not creating false urgency, manipulation. It's really I define ethics as the greatest good for all concerned. That if I'm providing enough value as a solution or a partner or a vendor or whatever term we want to use, then I don't need to create false sense of urgency. I don't need to manufacture discounting. I've realized that what I have is of significant value. You may or may not want it or need it, but I'm not going to manufacture urgency in that regard. Now, authentic selling, similar to what the S.P.E.A.K framework, I view authentic selling as the first part would be clarity. So in terms of how we really, the language of trust, when we're communicating, are we clear? The second, of course, authentic selling does have empathy, a lot of empathy, in fact, authenticity, value, and the commitment. And the commitment is a path, a journey we take to get to the solution together. That's not this, that's not disingenuous. So it's about forming partnerships. And I know that word gets overused. I used to drive me crazy when I go into with large clients that I used to work with, and well, it drove me crazy when they used the term vendor, but then when they would say partnership, but then the behaviors that we had against each other, with each other, didn't demonstrate partnership. And sometimes on my end, sometimes on their end, it just varied. It's an overused term, but it's about how do you gain commitment together. So yeah, similar. I think the mindset I want people to really use is out of integrity. The way in which you do that is, I think, selling authentically.
Love it. A big part of your message is own your voice. Own your voice. What does own your voice actually mean? And why is owning your voice so important when you're selling?
Well, I think it's important if you're selling or not selling. You know, the thing, I had my mentor, Bob, who now is in his mid-90s. He used to talk about owning a room. And we all have experienced individuals that they just walk into the room and their presence just and their command and their intent just kind of overpowers, and people are turning their head. And another way of thinking is about filling the room is another expression people often use, or they have it. Well, owning a voice, owning a room was such an important tagline for my brand, because what I realized is that I don't know that I've never, ever really fully owned my own voice until a couple years ago. I had a conversation on my oldest daughter, and she doesn't mind me sharing this story because it's important to my evolution and hers, maybe more me than her. She was in Chicago playing Division I soccer, and Michelle, my wife, walks up the steps into this office that I'm sitting in today. And she said, "You need to call Aub." And I'm like, "Aubrey," we call her Aub. I said, "What's going on?" Well, she had just left a sports psychologist, and the sports psychologist had recommended she consider some medication for anxiety. She was benched 3 days earlier for making 2 mistakes in the first game of a first soccer match in the Big East regular season. And she had just flunked or did not pass her first presentation class. At that moment, this is almost 2.5 years ago. At that moment, nobody other than Michelle, and I mean nobody, knew that I had been living with anxiety. And I thought at the moment, like, what on earth could I possibly say to Aubrey that might help her get over this challenge that she's currently facing in this moment? And so I decided to, for the first time, unmask what was behind me and own my voice. Because what it did was it empowered me to be authentically myself. And again, I'm very blessed with the opportunities I've had. I've a wonderful career in corporate, wonderful career now as an entrepreneur. And so I called her and I said, I thought back to that 19-year-old version of myself, like, what would I wanted my parents to say to me in that moment? Because they didn't know. I didn't share it with them, what had happened to me when I was a junior in college. And I just said to her, I said, "You're not broken at all. You're not broken. And in fact, your dad's had anxiety his entire life." And she's like, "You do? I had no idea, Dad. I had no idea." And she starts crying. I start crying. And then we started the kind of like, here's some tactical steps we can take together. And anyway, long story short, Jeff, it prompted me to go out on my own, create my own business. And it catapulted her to decide that she was going to leave the school she was at. She transferred to Valparaiso University. She started every game of every match. She has the all-time leader in minutes played. They went to the NCAA tournament. She was all Missouri Valley Conference. In the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, they played Notre Dame in the first round. And as I shared with you earlier, now she's about to start an incredible job in Chicago.
That's great.
My point is that that's what led me to this idea of owning your voice so you can own the room. That if you shed away and you are truly authentically yourself, and that you're showing up every single day as yourself, incredible things happen.
Yeah, it's that vulnerability you were talking about before. And I don't know if you've read this book. Are you familiar with a book called The Transparency Sale?
No, I have not read it yet.
Great book. I speak about it regularly because I'm a big fan. I used to work with the author. His name is Todd Capone. It's called The Transparency Sale. And he's huge on exactly that, being transparent. When we're selling, we're the greatest. We do all this great stuff. And he says it's actually better to not just talk about the good stuff, but also to talk about the warts.
Yeah.
We do this great. We're not so good at that. He talks about transparent negotiation. I'm a huge fan of this book. I think it's the best sales book that's come out in the last 20 years.
Oh, I love it.
Fantastic. But it is about that authenticity. In fact, I've said this before on this broadcast that he worked for a company that was very big on helping people with reviews. Like you go to Amazon, you're going to buy a product, there's 4,000 reviews. And what they discovered was that products that have all 5-star reviews, people tend to go, no way. But products that have a 4.4 to 4.6 review, or 4.3 to 4.6, something like that, they sell much better than products that have all 5-star reviews because it's transparent and authentic. It's just the way to be.
Well, let me. I can share to that end. That's an amazing story, and just to contextualize is what I want to what I would love to share with you.
Please.
Years ago, I had to go to a communication coach. All of the leadership team went to, and I was a relatively new senior leader, so I'd just been promoted from kind of middle management to senior leadership. And the feedback that I heard, it wasn't given to me in that moment, but what I heard from the individual who was conducting the session to the CEO of our company at the time, it's like, is that Scott guy real? Like, is he legit? And now I understand why that statement was made, is because I was performing in a way in which I thought I was supposed to be as a senior leader. Now, I was still trying to be authentically myself, but I was very much masked and almost presenting myself as somebody who was just kind of unflappable. And I would venture to guess that if we did that interview again, and I went through that process again, would be entirely different feedback.
Mm. Amazing. It's funny how sometimes things just happen at the right time. For those who are watching, they can see this. There's a gentleman on the screen. His name is John Conrath, and he says, Jeff, and I'm happy to see him. I'm honored that I call John a friend of mine, but he's one of the most authentic people I've ever met. He's just so real. Now, maybe he's the biggest BSer in the world, but if he is, he's a really good actor because, man, when you talk to him, you just get that he really cares about you and he's interested in you. And this is an amazingly accomplished guy. First, I was introduced to John because he has a Pink Floyd tribute band. I'm a huge fan of Pink Floyd, and they're one of the 2 best in the world that I've ever seen. They're just incredible. Their name is Floyd Nation. If you're a Pink Floyd fan and you're listening to this, just Google Floyd Nation. You're going to love them. But, for me, it's amazing because I see this guy up on stage and he's just, you see, he's real. He's not putting on he's being John, and he's interesting and he's fun. But you see his true love of the music, and you can tell that he just wants to give the audience a great, great experience and bring back, for me, my youth.
I love that.
He also is the founder or the co-founder of a financial services firm called Portfolio Medics. And I'm very honored they were my client for quite a while. And whether it's dealing with the people that he was working with and under him or on the stage, it's that whole authenticity thing that it sells. It sells from the stage. It sells in person. It's just the way it goes. Oh, look at this. And I thought that was my nephew, Mark Levy. Okay, it must be another Mark Levy, unless he suddenly grew a beard and I don't recognize him.
No, at any rate, Mark's a friend in California.
That's you're a friend. Okay.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. I really have like 4 more pages of questions. Normally we get to the last question at this point, but I'm having such a great, real, authentic conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that professionals make in their communication, and how can they fix them? Because as salespeople, we are communicators. So what are some of the big mistakes we make when communicating, and how can we fix those?
Lack of clarity would be the first. Lack of clarity. And I think that's just around how you organize your thoughts and make them audience focused, not you focused, and what you think is important. That's number one. Look, if I were to ask the audience members that are listening that now or later, if you think about a speaker that you heard over the course of maybe the last 10 years, and what are those characteristics that you're going to recall about that person? Very rarely. In fact, I've done this over and over and over again with every client I've ever worked with. About 90% of the time, it's going to be some delivery component, and which I think is super important. But so for me, it's about marrying together both content and delivery. But what I have found is that you are far more effective at excellent delivery if you have control of your content and you know the path you want to go. And if you're memorizing your content, it's almost impossible. to really be 100% connected and be authentically yourself and deliver with heart and enthusiasm that's going to be felt by the audience. So those are the two things. Decide who you're going to be, what you're going to say, and then start to really practice and marry those together. The other thing is most people don't practice nearly enough.
Yeah.
And I think there's a fine line here too. So whether it's your sales call, a sales pitch, or a presentation, or a formal presentation at a boardroom meeting, most people wing it literally in the last minute. And I've seen it over and over at the most senior level where literally they're putting together their talking points and their thoughts moments before they walk through to pitch for a business case to CEO, CFO as an example. I've seen it firsthand. And so practice and rehearse before you go, practice off Broadway. And I'm not talking about, I made the mistake recently. I was given a keynote, some new content I was sharing. I practiced way too much, Jeff, way too much. And I felt it. And it didn't feel right afterwards. It was too rote, too rehearsed, and I wasn't naturally myself. So a couple run throughs would be great, and especially if you're using something like the Power of Three, where you have bullet point driven, and just focus on connecting with your audience.
Yeah, amateurs wing it, professionals plan. I'm often talking to people, after they see a comedy show, and they make comments like, "Wow, you guys just get up there and you're just saying whatever comes to mind." Almost never. Robin Williams maybe was able to do that, but I know a lot of professional comedians. We know what we will improvise once we get up there a little bit, but I can tell you, first of all, producers, the people who produce the show, they tell you how much time you've got. You've got 7 minutes, you got 15 minutes, you got whatever the amount of time is. And when they say you've got 9 minutes, they don't mean 8 minutes and 45 seconds or 9 minutes and 10 seconds. They want you on the dot. So amateurs wing it, professionals plan it. When you said, if you think about speakers who have made an impact, two popped into my head immediately. And both of them were because of their passion. You could smell their passion. You could feel their passion just oozing out of every pore of their body, and the stories they told, and also the way they delivered. It was perfect. This first guy, I can't remember his name. I can see his face. I was at a National Speakers Association convention, which if you're going to be a speaker, you got to go at least to the convention once because it's amazing. Like you said, there were people on the main stage where I went, I can't even dream about being that good ever. But this guy walked on stage. He was probably silent for 20 seconds, just looking at the audience, connecting with them. And then every word he spoke was like this. He pronounced every single word as a separate idea almost. And I actually stood online for 20 minutes to shake his hand afterwards. And I said, "Do you really talk like that?" He goes, "No, man, I talk like you." I said, "Well, why'd you talk that way on stage?" "My speaking coach taught me to do that." And I'm like, I got to tell you, I could not listen. You had me at every single word. It was amazing. And then the other one is a gentleman who just passed away recently, sadly. His name is James Arthur Ray. He was a personal development guru who I followed for several years. This guy could tell a story and you'd be sucked in. I mean, these were expensive seminars. You go for a day or 3 days or 5 days, and it was thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. I didn't care. So just tell me stories. I don't care if I'm better after this. I don't care if I learn it. Just keep telling me stories. But it's that ability to suck you in and have you be interested in every word that's pouring out of their mouth that to me makes a great speaker.
I love
checking
that.
the time. Boy, oh boy. Well, we're going to have to do this again some point because I've
would love
already
to.
got my questions
love to.
ready for you. Let me do this. I'm going to share my screen if I can do the right thing here real quickly. Present. Here we go. While I'm doing that, this is for the people who are seeing it. No, that's not what I want. Here we go. Live. But would you tell people how they can reach you if they're interested? And remember, this will be converted to a podcast, so you might want to give out all the information.
Sure. So the barcode is shown right now is for my LinkedIn connection. So I love to be active on LinkedIn and connect with people. So if you just want to have any questions or comments or suggestions, want to connect with me on LinkedIn, the barcode will do that. We mentioned my website, but I'll mention it again, thescotramey.com. I'm most active on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you go to my website, not only can you download the Power of Three, but what also is included in there is a communication confidence quiz, just to see where you are on this, kind of on the spectrum of your confidence, and a communication archetype quiz to kind of determine what type of communicator you are. And of course, if you want to book a free call to discuss any challenges or opportunities, I would love to connect with anyone who wants to just chat through some challenges that you have. So that's there's literally every button will take you to book a free call on my website. except for one, which is requesting me as a speaker. So I'm pretty easy to connect with, and would love to hear from folks.
Would you like to give out that phone number?
Oh yeah, sure. 904-885-0074. 904-885-0074. I'm a texter. So if you want to get a hold of me immediately, text me and I'll return your text or call really quickly.
And if you're going to Scott's website, it's VTHE Scott, SCOTT. Ramey is RAMEY.com. Scott, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your brilliance so generously. I hope you will consider coming back at some point, and I will end as I always do. Gang, please remember that sales is a game of making things happen. Get out there and make sales happen. Have a great weekend, Scott. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you next time.